Welcome to the Power of Connection and Biz Show. I'm Kimberly Layne, Executive Leadership Coach, Team Building Partner, Best-Selling Author, and your host. Today's guest is a dynamic and an award-winning business owner. She's CEO of both the Red Ladder Incorporated and the Women at the Top Network. Her Women at the Top Network, which is also a blog, has been voted one of 25 career and businesswomen blogs to read by BlogHer in 2011. And as a column, has been read in over 7 countries. Her experience blends marketing and 2 decades of leadership to excel as a consultant, coach, trainer, and professional speaker. She's traveled the US extensively, educating and inspiring both women and men to dream big, act, and make things happen. Since starting her business in 2003, our guest has had one goal: to develop people and inspire success. She endears her clients and audiences by providing them with hands-on knowledge combined with practical wisdom and relevant stories gained through her success in navigating the corporate corridors for over 20 years. These attributes have earned her recognition for her business accomplishments and community contributions, including a 2016 NABU Minnesota Achieve Vision Award recipient and a Finance and Commerce Top Women in Finance Circle of Excellence Award in 2010, just to name a few of many. In addition to all of her accomplishments, her giving heart, and her desire to give back, what I love most about our guest today is her low-key humor and experiential style that makes her very approachable and well-loved by her audiences. Please welcome our accomplished guest, Regina Barr.
Thank you so much. Wow. I just chuckling when you hear all those things. And when you were talking about traveling extensively, I was like, I can't wait to get back to traveling extensively again.
All of us, whether it's personal or professional, just to get out of the house and just have a little bit more, daily change in our days to make it a little more exciting versus just what we have been experiencing, right?
Exactly. Completely agree.
Yeah. So speaking of change and things moving forward and opening up, a lot of us are starting to get back into the office, whether it's full-time or whether it's in a hybrid model. What would you suggest or might inform our audiences about as far as some of the most challenging issues you're seeing in the workplace with leaders today?
So it's interesting because we are trying to get back to a normal working environment, or maybe even what we should be calling a new normal. So a couple things I'm seeing, leaders are grappling with a workforce that doesn't necessarily want to come back. So a lot of leaders are grappling with, do we do a hybrid model? Are we allowing people to come in or requiring people to come in a few days a week, but then allowing them to work from home? And even one client was just telling me that they're looking at co-locating offices where one week you come in 2 days, the next week you come in 3, and the opposite week somebody else is in your office. So,
Wow.
I think that's one thing, is how do we coax people to come back to the office when they either like the flexible environment or some of them are still fearful. So that's one thing. The other thing they're dealing with while they're trying to get people back to work is that we're expecting, I'm sure you've heard, this turnover tsunami. So there are far more jobs than there are employees.
Right.
Sounds like the housing market right now. And so they're grappling with how to attract and retain qualified, high-skilled workers. And I think I don't care what size your business is, small on up. Then the last thing that I'm hearing is supply chain issues. And I think it's going to take a little bit longer, perhaps even over the next year, before some of that. And I'm seeing that whether it's a small business, like a contractor, they can't get, for example, doors. In my community, they're trying to do roads. They can't get manhole covers.
Right.
It's soup to nuts across the board with businesses. So I think those are some of the big things that I'm hearing about right now.
So I'd like to delve a little deeper on some of those topics. So, as far as what would you see if you're going to communicate to leaders to how they can entice their employees back into the office, what would you say would be some of the advantages of coming back into the office for a leader, for the company, for employees?
Well, I think for me, it's really about engagement. I feel like it's very hard to live out the vision and the mission and embrace the culture, if you will, particularly if you have employees that started during the pandemic. That's number one. Number two, the stress levels so on the one hand, people are saying, wow, I like the flexibility, but
Right.
I've also seen with those same people, the stress levels have gone up exponentially. And some of it is related to the home environment. Maybe it's you and your spouse are working from home, maybe you're homeschooling kids. Now kids are out of school, but now you're dealing with kids at home for the summer, or you're running them to camp. So those kinds of stressors are, I think, alive and well for most people. But the other stressor that's kind of interesting is Zoom fatigue.
Hmm.
They talk about, or there's studies that basically show that having to be constantly on camera, which I think is harder for women, because guys can jump out of the shower, let's face it, but we
Right.
women have to do a few more things before we get on the camera.
So,
And I think it's exhausting some people. And so what's interesting to me, and I don't know if you've had this experience, Kimberly, is that at first I thought, wow, my introverted clients are going to just love this. And I have found that to be very opposite, because they said, it's so draining to constantly be on the camera. And whereas they could bump into somebody in the hallway and say, hey, and get something done, now it's every time they want to do something, they have to schedule a meeting, and it can never be a conference call. It has to be a Zoom call. So they're really exhausted. And then on the other hand, the extroverts who are wanting to engage, they like to engage, even for them, it's been a little exhausting. So it's not quite what I thought it would be. So I think, um, for trying to get people to come back, you have to first overcome some of the resistance in coming back, getting them re-engaged with people, and seeing that there are benefits to coming to the office. So maybe you can make it a little more fun. Maybe, you have a reason to get them there other than just the day-to-day work. It's sort of like when people are recruiting, a lot of time gets spent on the money. And I say to people, money is important, but it's not typically the most important thing.
exactly.
So productivity for the company is probably not the most important thing for the employees. So what can we do to get them re-engaged in the culture, make it fun in some way, shape, or form, and make it more attractive to actually want to come into the office?
Yeah. And I think for those individuals that were, like you mentioned, had been hired during the pandemic, I think having them experience, even in a hybrid model, coming back into the office, they might see just some benefits in being able to have easier conversations, those informal chats, those water cooler
Yeah.
conversations, let's go grab a cup of coffee, or even, studies show just the mere fact of a sharing space with another human being, even if we're not having a conversation, and being in the same space is really beneficial for that, that whole sense of belonging, that whole sense of feeling connected and community.
Yes.
And kind of, I think it really takes subconsciously a level of stress down that you just kind of touched on, independent of all the other stressors that go on from working from home. So yeah, great advice to our listeners. Like myself, you work a lot with your leaders and clients on focusing on emotional intelligence. So how would you say emotional intelligence can help our viewers connect more powerfully at work and build better connections?
So I am a big fan of helping people get in touch with their emotional intelligence. And, for those that don't know, emotional intelligence is basically your ability, simply put, to be able to use your emotions to connect with others, to get things done more productively, or more collaboratively, if you will. So what's interesting to me is, I think that in this environment that we've been working with, I think people have lost touch with their emotions. And I think that we're going from one Zoom to the next Zoom to the next Zoom, that we're just exhausting ourselves. And then it's when we're done, we get off, and then it's whatever we have to do at home. Or so there are none of these boundaries anymore between the work and home life. And if you're not used to that, like you and I have learned over the years from working remotely how to do that. So I think I'm seeing, if you think about emotional intelligence, some of the components, the first is self-awareness, the second is self-regulation, and then it's motivation. There's different models, and the one that I subscribe to has that motivation piece, and then it's social regulation, or excuse me, social awareness and social regulation. So I think we've been so outwardly focused getting on these cameras that we've sort of lost sense of self, if you will. And I think that leaders need to really kind of get back in touch with that piece. And, we were just talking about how do we get people to come back into the office. And I think leaders that can touch into that self-awareness and be a little bit vulnerable, if you will, and share their own concerns and fears, I think will have a much better chance to connect and engage with people when they're trying to do that. So I think emotional intelligence is critical in the current environment.
Yeah, I mean, emotion drives everything. Emotion drives relationships, emotion drives sales. People don't buy on logic, they really buy on emotion, and then they use logic to confirm it. It's all of our relationships, are in marketing, you see all the commercials, it's all emotional connection, right? And if you're not if you're absolutely not emotional on a virtual platform, which virtual platforms traditionally and technology traditionally remove emotion, and we're very, kind of what you mentioned, we're on these virtual platforms, or we're texting, or we're emailing, and having very few, if any, in-person conversations, which is where the emotion is, right? So like you talked about, emotions being removed, then you go after a Zoom call onto task orientation, again, emotions being removed. It's kind of, everybody's really kind of emotionally starved. And I think that's a great point, to have leaders really be self-aware and focus on that emotional connection, vulnerability, humanness that we are, and bringing people back into the office. Because I think these virtual platforms, you've got to put a presence on, right? And that gets exhausting, and especially from an introvert perspective, right?
Exactly. And, there's a time and a place for all of the tools, including Zoom and being on video. And, you and I have used this platform, so it is a great connector. But when it becomes the sole connector, that's an SOLE, not even SOUL, because we could debate that we're not SOUL connectors.
Right, exactly. Yes, it serves a purpose. It has, provided us a venue for so many ways to see loved ones or connect with friends or business people, during the pandemic. But there's a bandwidth for everything, right? And it always is best when it's balanced with something else, right?
Completely agree. And I like how you talked about having a balance. I would also say some boundaries with that too. And just like back in the old days, you remember when we had to help each other understand, when do you send a text versus when do you send an email versus
Right.
doing a phone call. I think the same thing applies. I had a client call where we were going to do a team meeting and talk about some candidates that they were looking at. And they were like, oh, we're going to do a conference call. And I was like, wow. I'm like, that's an anomaly, because usually everybody be like, oh, let's set up a Zoom, or let's do a Teams, or let's do a WebEx, or whatever. And I was just like, wow, we're going old school today. And we just chuckled, right? Because again, time and a place for different tools. And
What, just out of curiosity, what was the reasoning for doing a conference call?
I think because literally one of the board of directors was in a place that they wouldn't be able to do uh, the Zoom. So I think that sort of leveled the playing field, because you know how it is when you're the
Yeah.
only one who's not on Zoom, or, it's like when you also have a meeting where a whole group is together and then you're the odd man out.
Right.
And I see people trying to do that now too, where they have some people in a group and then they're trying to Zoom in and figure out how to use that technology on a laptop. So I think when you're trying to do some of that with a group and some remote people, that's really when you need to have much better equipment, where you're able to have a big screen and like a camera that can project on the screen, so that you're able to link people in that way. I'm not the tech expert. I know that the tech expert at some of these companies absolutely know how to make that happen. So
Right, right. I'd be curious what happened in that interview, if they did follow up with the Zoom call too. We're just, I have my own personal opinion. I do think um, you eliminate some of those cons you suggested on a virtual platform, or having Zoom for some people, and by having a conference call first. I don't know. It'll be interesting to see how that played out from a
yeah.
hiring, from
Well,
a
even,
level.
from an interviewing standpoint, we talked about getting people back to work, or the shortage of candidates. I still recommend that people, to level the playing field, that they screen resumes, they do phone screens, that they do some email screening where they're asking specific questions to get a sense of how they communicate via email. Then if take the whittle those candidates down, and the ones that you like from there, then I suggest Zoom or in person, because now obviously in person is becoming more of an option, but minimum Zoom. And then if you feel like there's still a viable candidate, then bring them in. So, and quite honestly, Zoom is great for out of state candidates or people that are quite a distance. So you can kind of engage and connect that way. And if it is a really good fit, then you fly them in. So
Yeah, and it's kind of a dichotomy, because a virtual platform, or Zoom, if you will, is technology which it's not in person, so it's somewhat separating, but it also can be very invading, because you're seeing somebody's home, you're seeing whether their office
yes,
is messy, you're seeing whether they're doing their interview from a bedroom, from the kitchen, are they dressed appropriately, what I mean, is the kid running, you get a lot of insight about somebody even though it's not in person, so it's kind of this weird dichotomy.
it is very
Yeah.
weird. And to yourself, to your point, excuse me, when you said that it can be somewhat invasive, absolutely. And today I'm in my office, but sometimes when my husband is working from home, we've had to trade off, and then I'm in my dinette, and I finally had to kind of carve out a little space behind me with some things that were not dinette-ish, it didn't look like my dining room, so that when I'm down working in that space, I have a professional setup. So yeah, there's all kinds of things that we didn't have to think about before. And I will tell you, you talk about like being in a bedroom, a messy bedroom. I had someone not only do something when they were interviewing me for a virtual seminar for an
Okay.
organization, where they sat in a bedroom, and I'm not kidding you, unmade bed
Oh
that you
no.
could see stuff thrown around. And then she looked like she had just gotten out of bed and had a bathing suit, and it looked like a bathing suit top on, but
Oh,
I don't know that for sure. And I thought, wow, this is a professional organization. And in my head, because I'm a coach, you're a coach,
right.
I'm like, wow, I hope somebody coaches her, and I hope it doesn't have to be me. And
No. Yeah.
not then and there, of course, because I had to get on and do what I needed to do. But I thought, oh my goodness, people, it's like when social media first came out and everybody was posting all kinds of things. Now it's video. I'm like, you really need to be mindful of what you're just maybe inadvertently putting on a video.
Yeah, I'm surprised you didn't have a bowl of cereal sitting there too. But
I couldn't tell with all the stuff around.
wow, very insightful of somebody, right? It's amazing how much those external clues will give you so much more about a person sometimes than what they're communicating, right?
Exactly. So
Going
we got to make sure we're giving the right clues.
exactly, we're showing up properly, right? We're stepping into it all right. So going back to emotional intelligence, just because I know everybody always wants practicum, right? They any
Yes.
kind of key points for helping leaders
So
adopt
here,
more emotional, or anybody in general, even listeners, whether you're a leader or not, just kind of to gain more emotional intelligence in this scenario.
yeah, so here's what I'll tell you, and I don't know if this is your experience. Is the minute you start talking about emotions, right? Most people want to run screaming. And I would say, and I'm generalizing here, most men, right? They're just like, oh, it's touchy-feely, whatever. But here's the interesting thing. I find that I mentioned earlier, most leaders are out of touch with their feelings. So one simple thing you can do is to check in with yourself. And you could do that in a couple different ways. One, for some people who are very busy and it's one more thing they have to do, I want to make it as easy as possible. So I'll say just randomly on your Outlook or whatever electronic calendar you use, put in emotional checkup, a couple different places throughout the day. When that comes up, keep a notebook and just write, here's how I'm feeling. And if you are aware, what triggered it, because that becomes really important. Another way to do it is just end a day, just journal about, reflect on your day and say, okay, how was I feeling today? What triggered those feelings? How did I respond? Like, what was the behavior? Because as you mentioned earlier, emotions drive behavior, right? There's a trigger that drives that. So that's one thing, is kind of get in touch with your feelings, even though it may feel woo woo or touchy feely to some people. The second thing, because that's the self awareness piece. The second thing gets into that self regulation piece. So, what I like to say to people is when you're looking at that, try to figure out what your triggers are. Like, what's going to cause you to, especially if it's a negative, right? If we're responding in a happy way, nobody probably really cares. But it's when we have like an emotional meltdown or some kind of an outburst. And when does that usually happen? It's when we're under stress. So
Right.
I'll use myself as example. I'm sure you like to use yourself too, because it doesn't put anyone on the spot. So for me, sometimes when I'm getting frustrated, I literally can know that I'm gonna see red, I guess, because I literally do something with my eyelids. It's like an extended blink. And if I'm self aware enough to catch that, I will try to do a break in the action. Say, hey, could we take a 5-minute break or something? And then because I know I'm literally, so listen to the words, I'm getting hot under the collar,
Right.
I will sometimes do a little walkabout, or I will get an ice cold water and just take a break and drink the water and then come back. And usually that's enough. So you have to identify the trigger so you can avoid a negative behavior, and then you can address that. And then I know this, we've probably been talking about this a lot, but I'm really focusing on emotional resilience and well-being of employees right now, because it is a stressful time, whether they're working from home or trying to get back in the office, and that's exercise. Do you remember? I'm not a runner or a jogger, full disclosure, but do you remember when people used to talk about like why people jog, and they would talk about the endorphins
Right.
and sort of like this runner's high that they would get? Well, it's the same no matter what kind of exercise you do. So I encourage people to do some kind of physical activity. Now, you and I probably hear this all the time. I don't have the time, or people get in their head, I need an hour. You don't need an hour, 5 minutes, 10 minutes. When I used to work in downtown Minneapolis, I would do on my lunch break a 10-minute power walk in the Skyway. I live in Minnesota, so sometimes it's 20 below zero or worse here. And I love to walk outside. I am not going outside in that environment.
Nope.
So I'll set a timer and put some music on. I'll do 5-minute drills where I'll just walk up and down my staircase. So I get, we're all busy, but figure out something that just gets you moving, because that will help you to get those good chemicals that we release, not just the stress chemicals that cause us to behave in ways we might not like, or overeat, or do a lot of the other things that are detrimental. So hopefully those are a couple of things your viewers and listeners can just try out, because they're simple, and I want to keep it simple for people.
Yeah, and it's practical, and it's real life stuff. So what I find myself when I'm all of a sudden and I'm presented with an issue, and I can't process it. I don't know how to respond to an email, or I just had a phone call or whatever, and I know I need to take a break before I take the next task. I find that even, and I also realize in that stressful moment, I'm a big thing about breathing. So I realize during that stressful moment, you're probably holding your breath, right?
Yes.
And the biggest thing is, one, to recognize. And so this is where being self-aware, you've tensed up, you've held your breath, which is the worst thing to do. And that's only escalates your ability to think clearly, because you're deprived of oxygen. So if you can consciously realize that you're not breathing deep, and take a couple deep breaths, just, and just relax your shoulders. And that's what I think. If you can't do that, just recognize it standing there or sitting there. That's a good excuse to get up and walk around. Like a lot of time, I'll just do a phone call walking around my office or walking around the house. That's movement. That's getting energy. That's getting flow. That's getting you to breathe differently, to breathe deeper. Like I'm a big, now that the weather's getting better, obviously not in the wintertime in Minnesota is not a good time, but getting out in nature also puts perspective on the stress you've been feeling. But just something about nature is just a beautiful thing. So I think nature and breathing properly are really some two key things to bring that self-awareness, self-regulation, to be able to approach it in a very more holistic and not reactional.
I'm glad you mentioned the nature thing, because I just read a study that basically said if you spend 20 minutes in nature, it reduces your stress level. I think it's like something like 38%. But here's the thing, when you're doing it, they recommend you not be on your phone,
Right, exactly.
sort of just. So an example is last night, I was feeling a little fatigued, and I actually went out and spent a half hour, not exciting, weeding my garden, which needed it, because we're gearing up to refresh the mulch, but I wanted all the weeds gone before we do that. And I can't even tell you, even though it was kind of a lot of bending down and, some hard work, and it was pretty warm here, I felt really great afterwards, like very refreshed, and no cell phone, no music. Even my husband wasn't out there, it was just me doing my little thing. And so I'm glad you mentioned spending time in nature, because I think that's really critical for all of us.
Yeah, and I've done a lot more gardening since we've been, when the pandemic started, and it's very, very, very fulfilling. There's something about digging in the earth or planting or
Yes.
weeding. I don't know. It's cultivating. It's healing. It's a different dynamic, and I haven't put my finger on it versus a walk. Both are very beneficial, but whatever works for you. But yeah, I think
Yeah.
gardening is weed, yeah, all that with plants and nature is just awesome. So. We're probably running close to the end of our conversation today, unfortunately. So I always like to give an opportunity for you to express anything that you'd like to share with the audience. We will talk about your uh, coaching sessions, your coach chat, but just anything else you want to give insight to for the audience about what we've talked about in closing.
I think what I would like to say is that we're coming out of some unprecedented times, and I think stress levels are high. And I think we're very good about giving other people grace. And I would really encourage people to give themselves grace, grace, because I feel that particularly women, men and women, because I see it with my male clients as well, we are so hard on ourselves and we beat ourselves up. And sometimes you just have to say, okay, what did I learn from that? Brush yourself off, take a deep breath, and then move on.
Yeah, I think grace and kindness for yourself is really important, especially when we're all, there's is some anxiety in going back to work or just getting back out the open. So I just being conscious of that and giving yourself some grace and kindness and love in the process will help you feel better in addition to everybody else around you, right?
Correct.
So tell us a little bit more about your coach chat, and I'll certainly share some more information on how you can get in touch with Regina in the show notes. But I do want you to have a little moment to tell us about that.
Thank you. I as you mentioned earlier, I love to develop people and help inspire them to succeed. And so I offer a coach chat. It's a 30-minute, no obligation conversation with me. When people sign up, I send them a little questionnaire, very brief, 4 questions for them to complete. I want them to get good value. And whether they work with me or not, I want to help them move themselves forward, regarding whatever the issue is. So that's sort of my give to people, just to, again, help people, especially during this challenging time, either accomplish a personal or a professional goal, or at least help get them pointed in the right direction. So I guarantee that if someone has a coach chat for me, that they'll feel it was a good use of their time.
No, I know. One of the great attributes of you, you've just got such a big giving heart, and there's just a lot of joy in giving to others and helping other people be the best version of themselves and create more happiness. So I'm totally aligned with you on that. So in closing, I'd like to thank you, the audience, for listening to the Power of Connection and Biz show. If you like the content we've shared today, please click like and also subscribe to our YouTube channel. And of course, I would also like to thank our wonderful guest today, Regina Barr. You'll find her contact information and any other way you'd like to communicate with her in our show notes. So till next time, remember, connections change everything.